Okay, well, welcome everybody to this AdFly webinar. You're very welcome to attend, particularly those of you who weren't able to come to our previous sessions over the last few months. We had two, one back in July and then another in November. If you're not on the mailing list, I do recommend you join to keep in touch. You can do that by just going on the adfly.org.uk website, and there's a pop-up which will invite you to enroll for the newsletter there. And the only other thing for me to say, I think, is to welcome Dave back into the AdFly world. Dave was involved with AdFly for over 20 years. He was on the committee from 2002. He might even still been at school then. I can't remember. And he took on many of the key roles: membership secretary, editor of the newsletter when we still had paper newsletters posted out to our many members, and also created the AdFly website I just mentioned as well. He took over as chair for a while as well after the sad death of our previous chair, John Webster, and has been involved with right from the start with the setting up of the community rail partnership back in 2005, which was partly prompted by the efforts of the then AdFly committee and members. Dave, despite living down in miles away, somewhere in the West Country, I'm not sure where you are these days, the West Midlands or
West Midlands, moved around.
Yeah, is still involved with the Bricketwood Station Heritage Trust, which those of you who joined our last session in November will have heard more about as well. So without further ado, can I hand over to you, Dave, and to look forward to your presentation.
Right, thank you. Well, yes, I mean, I've got a lot to say on the Abbey line. It's my pet line, so you'll have to stop me if I carry on for too long. But I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of history and sort of where it is now and where it might be going in future. All from my point of view, of course. I'm not officially linked to county council or the train operator or anything like that. So some of what I might say might be a bit controversial, or who knows, but we'll so I'm going to cover to start with why I'm so interested in the Abbey line from when I was a little boy, some of its prehistory, and then going through the decades, how it went from a sort of typical country branch line, nearly got completely closed under beaching, somewhat of a renaissance between sort of 1983 and the advent of the CRP in 2005, how that then developed, what's happening now, I suppose, or as I understand it, a little bit of a diversion onto the Bricketwood Station Heritage Trust and where we are with that, and then some thoughts about what the future might hold. So lots to cover. Anyway, without further ado, I must admit I'm not a professional historian. I'm just a interested amateur, really. But one of the best books, well, the best book about the history of the line, and from which I'm pulling quite a lot of information, is the Oakwood Press book of St Albans Branch, and it's now been published in 2 editions. I have the 2008 edition here in my hand in case there's any difficult questions, but the original edition, the well-thumbed pink one on the left there, that dates from 1990. And it was one of my most prized possessions when I was young. Always had a fascination in local history, but particularly railways. And when I discovered this book, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. There have been other books on the subject. I've got another one there in the middle, which is more of a picture book. But really, the Oakwood Press book is is sort of the definitive history of the line. And I think copies are still available if you look online. We used to have quite a few. We were selling them in 2008. Anyway, so a little bit about me. I was brought up in North Watford, born and raised. First house was Sandringham Road, which, for those who know Watford, has the sad sort of infamy of being the site of a V1 flying bomb during the Second World War. It was the greatest tragedy to hit Watford during the war. 37 people died on 30th of July 1944. Not that I remember that, of course. But I later my parents moved to Westfield Avenue, just down the road. And Westfield Avenue is on the Knutsford estate, or Tudor estate, which was one of those 1930s expansion of Watford. And I lived there from the age of 2 until I left home in 2003. I still obviously go back there to see my parents, so I'm still very much Watford is where the heart is. I also had a great aunt and a great uncle living in Bradshaw Road, which, as you can see here, backed onto the line. And there wasn't much to do when I used to go around there because they were pretty boring relatives. But the great thing about going around there was that the railway ran at the end of the garden on the embankment just before it crosses Balmoral Road. So I have very early memories of listening to the Abbey Line trains rattling backwards and forwards. I think that section of line is still jointed track, funnily enough, so you could hear the trains coming almost from when they departed Watford Junction. I spent my primary school years at Knutsford School, which again was part of the 1930s expansion of Watford, which paralleled the Abbey Line up towards Watford North and beyond. Knutsford JMI was a lovely 1930s building, but sadly burnt down in 1999. Nothing to do with me, I hasten to add. And I remember once ransacking the resources cupboard to build a model of Watford North Station out of balsa wood, and I must have consumed the entire year's worth of balsa wood, but no one questioned it, so that was all right. Anyway, all of this fostered my interest in Watford's history, and I also had some association with Casbury Park as well, which I'll come back to. So this is a picture of Watford North in the 1980s and probably represents my earliest memories of the line when it was still diesel. Probably, although this was early Network South East days, so the line had a bit of money spent on it. Famous red lampposts. This was in the early sort of sectorisation of British Rail when they were trying to make British Rail much more commercial, which subsequently led to privatisation. But back in those days, it was, I suppose, not in the greatest of shapes. There wasn't much investment. It had narrowly avoided beaching, 20 years before, and it was sort of holding on by a thread. I remember going to Verulamium, taking the train to St Albans with my grandparents, which was quite a treat on the train. This location is special if you're into railway, technical railway history, in that it was one of the earliest automatic half barrier crossings installed in the country, and it was lasted until 2006 when it was replaced. Now the crossing keeper's house, which you can see on the right, that's still there. Back in the day, that used to be a lovely little cottage. It's been expanded and extended ever since, and it's lost a bit of its character, but it's still I suppose an original piece of Abbey Line history. And just say a little bit more about me. I'm an engineer in the rail industry. When I went to university in London, I graduated as a chartered mechanical engineer, and I went to work at Bombardier in Derby, which at the time was the UK's only remaining train builder. So I got involved in all kinds of projects, as you can see some of them here, some bogie design work, involved with the new trains for the Metropolitan Line and District Line, and also those high-speed trains in the top right picture there, which run through St Albans City Station. I was involved in the maintenance of them for a couple of years. Then my career took a bit of a turn into the slightly unusual. I went down to work at the West Somerset Railway as head of mechanical engineering for a couple of years. And what I thought was special about this picture is that it shows 3 Derby-built locomotives, which we had together at that time. 2 7Fs, which used to operate on the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway, the only 2 survivors, and they were operating together on the line in my time. And in the foreground is a Fowler 4F 060, which, although that one was never a Watford engine, several of those sort of locomotives used to work on the branch line. And as I found out, they were certainly workhorses. I wouldn't say they had the finesse of Great Western locomotives. The mechanical tolerances on Derby products, it is true what they say, they were a bit more slack than a Great Western locomotive. However, it was very interesting, being responsible for the operation of these things day in, day out for a good couple of years. Taught me a lot. Anyway, I then went back into the mainstream rail industry, if you can call it that, and I now work for Viva Rail, which some of you might have heard of. Viva Rail is it's subject of a presentation in itself, really. I'm happy to do a presentation on Viva Rail another day, but we basically have taken the old D78 stock from the underground and turned them into various types of train. The first was a diesel electric multiple unit, 3 of which now operate on the Bedford-Bletchley line. So there's a nice link there with local railways. But more recently, we've developed a diesel battery hybrid train, which is the shiny looking train in the top left there. And we've pioneered essentially the use of battery trains in the UK, and we continue to do that. So I won't dwell on that, but I can certainly talk for England or Viva Rail as well, perhaps another time. Anyway, back to the Abbey line. So I'm going to attempt to illustrate now how railways first came into the area, or at least the area associated with the Abbey line. So here's a map of where we are. Obviously, that's a map of today. And this is more or less West Hertfordshire, East Hertfordshire, and a bit of Bedfordshire. The first railway in the area was the London and Birmingham Railway, which came through Watford in July 1837. That opened from Euston to Boxmoor, the first section. And in October of that year, it was extended to Tring. And then by September 1838, it was open all the way through to Birmingham. That was made possible by the opening of the Kilsby Tunnel. In 1846, the London and Birmingham Railway was absorbed into the London North Western Railway, which meant that the railway under its control extended all the way from London to Birmingham and Holyhead, Liverpool, Manchester and Carlisle. So the first attempts to connect St Albans, which the gentry of St Albans felt that they'd been rather bypassed by the railways at that point. The first tentative steps were taken by none other than the Eastern Counties Railway. And this was during the 1840s, the so-called railway mania. And the Eastern Counties Railway promoted a line from Hertford through to Hatfield and St Albans. But this scheme was opposed essentially by the Great Northern Railway, who themselves deposited plans in 1846 for a line between Hatfield, St Albans, Harpenden and Dunstable. Now, the Great Northern Line didn't actually receive royal assent, so it was turned down by Parliament. But in the following session, they received another proposal for a railway from Hertford to Hatfield and St Albans. In the event, however, the Great Northern scheme didn't go ahead because the powers eventually lapsed, and what eventually became the Hatfield and St Albans line was not constructed until much later. Anyway, spurred on by the Great Northern, the London North Western Railway themselves announced plans to build a line between Watford, St Albans and Luton, and that happened in 1845. Subsequently, they decided that they wanted to extend it to Dunstable, and that bill was deposited in 1847. That did receive royal assent, but unfortunately the whole scheme died a death due to a very severe economic crisis, spurred on by very, very wet weather and a series of failed harvests. And then in 1848, the Victorian stock market collapsed. There was mass starvation in Ireland, political unrest in England, revolutions in Europe. So believe it or not, all of that had an effect on that scheme, which was eventually abandoned. And then a whole 10 years passed, really, before another attempt was made to reach St Albans, by which point the Great Northern Railway main line had opened, which was what became the East Coast Main Line. And in 1853, the London North Western Railway directors had another go, and they brought forth a bill to construct a line between Amersham and St Albans. Bill was read for the first time in 1853, but only the line to St Albans was sanctioned. So that was eventually, there it is. That's the Amersham Watford to St Albans scheme in 1853, and that was the one that eventually got permission from Parliament to be built. But as I say, only between Watford and St Albans. So construction finally started in 1856 of the Abbey line, and the main contract was awarded to Richard Goodison of Lewisham, and overall supervision of the work was carried out by William Baker, who was, I think, the LNWR's sort of chief civil engineer. And the line was virtually complete by 1857, but in the process, how familiar does this sound? It's almost bankrupted Goodison. the contractor. The original budget was something like £70,000. Wouldn't it be lovely you could build an 8-mile railway, £70,000 these days? The final spend was not known, in common with lots of infrastructure projects. But finally, in February 1858, London North Western Railway locomotive number 133 worked through St Albans at the head of an engineer's train consisting of 21 wagons and a luggage van. And on 9th of March that year, the same locomotive conveyed Robert Stevenson, no less, William Baker and Richard Goodison, the contractor, over the newly completed railway. And would you believe it, it nearly came to grief when the loco ran into a pile of bricks placed on the line by vandals. So on its very first day of operation, even before it opened to passengers, it nearly got scuppered by vandals. And then finally, on the 5th of May, 1858, it was opened. And it's in 2018, it celebrated 160 years. So there's the potted history. I'm sure there's a lot more. The railway mania at that time, as many people know, the whole country was engulfed, in the 1840s to 1890s with, trying to build railways here, there and everywhere. It was completely sort of unfettered market, which is why we ended up with so many railways to everywhere and why so many eventually got closed down under beaching. But it was all, all market driven. I'm just adding in there the Midland Main Line, which opened in 1868, just for comparison, and the Great Northern opened in 1850. Now, the Great Northern Railway, what became the Hatfield-St Albans Line, opened in 1866. So the original station at Watford, which is actually still there, was on the north side of St Albans Road. Obviously very small at that time. It wasn't a junction. It was just a through station with 2 platforms. The station building still stands. Unfortunately now, as Kevin will know, it's completely engulfed by a massive office development, which is a bit of a shame. But at least the building itself, which is either Grade 1 or Grade 2 listed, still survives behind all that lot. And it was only replaced or only superseded in 1858 when the St Albans line opened. And the new station was opened on its present site to the south of St Albans Road Bridge. So this is what we ended up with in the 1860s, 1870s. You can see the Watford to Birmingham, London to Birmingham line in the bottom left, the Abbey line. And of course, when the Abbey line opened, originally it only had 2 intermediate stations, one at Bricket Wood and one at Park Street, although the exact location of the one at Park Street is a matter of a bit of debate. It is thought that the original station was actually more in the area of the current How Wood station. Later branches to open from Watford included the Rickmansworth Church Street branch, which opened in 1862, the Croxley Green branch, which didn't come along until 1912, and the Stanmore branch was 1890. And there was a link for a while, as a lot of people know, between the Abbey line and the Midland Main Line, which I will come on to if I go the right way. Now, this link actually never saw passengers, as far as we know, and it was built to facilitate the construction of the Midland Main Line. So just to show where it was, here you have in purple the Abbey line, and you can see this is a aerial shot from the 1950s, I think, so it's not terribly up to date, but you can see Park Street, location of Park Street Station there on Watling Street, and you can see Abbey Station in the distance, and this is the Midland Main Line, and just here is the Knapsbury link, as it were. So it branched off from the Abbey line just to the point north of what's now Howard Station, and you can still trace the formation. If you just go back to that, you can just trace it up to, there's still sections of embankment running up to Watling Street, where there used to be an overbridge, and then the rest of it disappeared under what became the Radlett Aerodrome / Handley Page. Handley Page, obviously famous for building aircraft, particularly during the Second World War and in the Cold War, and that's a Handley Page Victor, for those who don't know, and they used to be test flown from the airfield. I don't know what the status of the Radlett Rail Freight Exchange is these days, but I think the southern part of this site was earmarked for the Rail Freight Exchange. but I'm not sure whether the actual line of the Knapsbury link was impacted by that. I'll come back to that later. So this is another map from 1902, again just showing the 2 intermediate stations. And as you can see, not a lot of development really. Watford in those days was a typical market town, one long street, as it is described in history books. And it wasn't really until the late Victorian, early Edwardian period when it started expanding northwards into what's now North Watford and Garston. So we're going to take a bit of a journey along the line, as it would have been really, didn't change much between 1858 and 1966, apart from the extra stations. Start with the view of Watford Junction, and like many railway stations, or main junctions in those days, it was a very busy place, a lot going on. It had a goods yard, it had an engine shed, it had a carriage shed, it had private sidings. It had 4 at that point when the map was drawn. It had 4 through lines like it has now, and the Abbey line itself had a direct connection to the slow lines. The engine shed itself, as you can probably make out there, was a pretty compact and constrained space. I'm sure a lot of people remember it probably, and it was a bit of a train spotter's paradise from what I can tell. To get into the loco shed or out of the loco shed, the locos had to do quite a few manoeuvres backwards and forwards to shunt into the sheds because of its compact nature. But it had a water tower, a coaling stage, a turntable. The turntable, as you can see by the little circle there, was just to the left of the Abbey line, and it was so close to the Abbey line that it wasn't actually safe to pass branch line trains past it while there was locomotives turning on it. So they had to get permission from the signalman to use the turntable, which is a slightly unusual operational quirk of Watford Junction. Back in those days as well, what became the Bakerloo line used to run up the back of the what's now platform 6, right to the almost as far as the St Albans Road overbridge. And also, the station was surrounded by a lot of industry. What's now TK Maxx or Home Base or whatever it is now used to be a sawmill. It then became a factory of printing inks, which supplied some of the printing works in Watford. Watford's famous for 2 industries, brewing and printing, but perhaps a bit less known is that they also had a lot of general engineering. It was very much an engineering town as well. Rather a shame it didn't survive as an engineering town. Enough for me to take part in it, but anyway, a lot of interesting industry. Here's a couple of views of the loco shed. The top picture is an earlier view showing predominantly London North Western Railway tank locos. These were big tank engines, 442s, designed for working the semi-fast express or semi-fast services out of Euston. The equivalent of the Class 350s now. Smaller locomotives typically worked up the branch, so you'd have initially, I think it's 024 or 042 tank locomotives, and some of them are very elderly. They dated back to sort of 1870s, and they were still going into the 1930s. But when the London North Western Railway eventually became part of the London Midland region, London Midland Scottish Railway in 1923, progressively the locomotives of the London North Western were sort of phased out, and LMS Derby designed products took over. So the lower image there shows some typical LMS locomotives. 264 tank in the foreground. It's a Fowler 264 tank, and I think a 044 tank as well, and some Fairburn tanks. I'm getting into technical railway detail. This was one of the more typical locomotives, Fowler 264 tank. Strangely enough, there's a project to build a replica of one of these. None of them survived into preservation, but the group currently building an LMS Patriot locomotive wants to move on and do one of these next, which would be quite nice. So one day, perhaps, when they finish that, we can get it running on the Abbey line for a special. Would be quite appropriate. Some more views here. This is looking at top view is looking across to the goods yard. Typical ex LNWR tank and a couple of coaches. Like I say, very elderly locomotives at that point. And then the bottom view is looking up the branch line with the extensive carriage sheds on the right. And just disappearing off up the line is a 2-car push-pull unit. I suppose really the forerunner of our multiple units. Really, this was a way of avoiding having to run the locomotive around at either end of the line. So the driver could actually drive the train from this end of the opposite end of the train from the loco. The fireman would stay on board the loco to keep the fire going and keep the water up, keep the steam up. But the driver, via a series of fairly dubious linkages and bell codes, would operate the loco from a distance. And that was one of the early ways in which they tried to save money on the line by making it a bit more operationally efficient. This shows the connection between the main line and the branch line. And as you can see, you've got the 080 locomotive taking a train off the branch and onto the main line, passing with a 044 tank, bringing one on. You could actually, as well as passing trains at Bricket Wood in those days, you could pass trains at Watford Junction by virtue of the double track platform. I think this is a rail tour in the 1950s. Probably, I think that loco on the right there did the Stanmore branch, the Rickmansworth branch, the Abbey line, all in one day, which a lot of photos were taken. So that's quite a famous rail tour. So moving up the line, this is the approach to Watford North and Watford North itself. On the left is Sandown Road, which is or was the location of a lot of factories. There's still a lot of factories, still a lot of factory units down there and old factory buildings. Not sure how many of them are still manufacturing anything. I spent a bit of time in one of them during my work experience at school, in what was the UK lift company. Fascinating experience, real old school engineering works, where the engineers would take a set of drawings at the start of the week and they'd go and get all their raw materials off the shelf, and they would cut it and drill it and machine it and weld it together. And by the end of the week, you'd have a finished hydraulic lift, all one bloke basically in a workshop cell, which was fascinating introduction to engineering for me. But sadly, a lot of that industry, in common with the rest of the country, has now disappeared or gone overseas. I went back to get some more work experience a couple of years later, and it had all gone. It had all been turned into basically a warehouse. Anyway, so Watford North, on one side of the line was the factory units, which had their own sidings. And then on the other side was the 1930s Knutsford Estate, which is where I was brought up. Bit further north of Watford North, so cross over the level crossing at Bushy Mill Lane, and the sidings fanned out either side of the line. On the left, they were predominantly serving the printing works, which became Oddham's and is still there. Not quite as big as it used to be, but it's still a printing works next to Asda. And on the right, a lot of the foundries and printing works, which is now the Greycanes estate. So there were sidings absolutely everywhere. And in common with all the other branch lines in the country, there would be a daily pickup freight, because freight travelled in the wagon load back then. So it would, a train would go along and it would pick up wagons from Watford North, and it would go a bit further and get some from Bricket Wood and go up St Albans Abbey, get a few more there. So not very efficient, but everything had to be carried in those days on the railway. So a few views of Watford North. Watford North started life in 1910, only opened in 1910 as Callerland. Callerland is an area, it's actually further towards Leavesden Road, for those that know Watford. It used to be Callerland Farm, all now under housing, but I think the name was changed in the 1920s or something. But anyway, Watford North Halt was a very basic halt, had a little booking office, had a very long waiting shelter. The book says that the reason the waiting shelter was so long was because of all the factory workers that used to use the line. So I think in those days there was a shuttle service between Watford Junction and Watford North, which was just to take the factory workers to and from the Watford Junction. Obviously had a level crossing from day one, and it was manually operated in those days, so they had to employ a level crossing keeper. Not sure whether it had a wheel to operate the gates or whether they were pushed open manually, but all very idyllic. And you can just see in the bottom left corner there, in the background, the sidings fanning out into the local industry. Something else about a little bit more about the engineering around Watford North. Some of the businesses that operated in those days, you had Wells Watford Brewery, which later became part of Bentskins. Bentskins was, and it is actually still a brand name, just about. Bentskins Brewery was the main brewery in Watford, which is now, part of it is now Watford Museum in Lower High Street. But it absorbed several little breweries in the area, of which one of them was just backing onto the Abbey line. Another quite interesting company was the Dr. Tibble's Vi Cocoa Company. And this was a company that produced a range of cocoa products, including Dr. Tibble's Vi Cocoa, Dr. Tibble's Cocoa Tablets, Dr. Tibble's Brain Feeder, and Dr. Tibble's Child's Restorer, whatever that was. The company actually claimed that these products offered numerous health benefits, but in fact, I think one of the main reasons is that they contained a lot of cocaine. So no wonder they were revitalising. And not sure how you restore a child with cocaine, but anyway, it wouldn't be done now. Anyway, in February 1903, a very large fire broke out at Dr. Tibble's factory, and that was the largest fire that had ever been seen in Watford at the time. And the factory was eventually, as a result, closed down and rebuilt. And today, the site is basically occupied by Asda. Another slightly famous company is the British furniture manufacturer Hill, spelled Hille, which in 1951 moved to Watford into the former Wells Brewery building. And this company was founded by a Russian immigrant, Salomon Hill, and it specialised in modern furniture design. Most notably, these polypropylene stacking chairs, as you can see in the middle there. So they were designed by Robin Day while he was working at Hill in Watford. So the polyprop chair went on to become the world's best-selling chair. So there we are. Watford's famous for plastic chairs. And I think Hill House is actually a listed building in itself on St Albans Road. And finally, the British Moulded Hose Factory was the scene of another big fire in 1961, as you can see in the top left corner there. That's looking up Sandown Road. And yeah, several people in my family remember that. Unfortunately, there's not much left of the industry now. It's all either warehouses or supermarkets. You can just about make out the remains of the sidings when you leave Watford North going towards St Albans. There was still a connection to them until about 10 years ago when the level crossing was renewed. It was actually the last freight facility on the line. It carried on, I think, until sort of 1980s for a few things. This is just, as I mentioned earlier, the site of UK Lift Company, where I did some work experience. We've talked about that already. And this is another prominent local landmark. The former printworks of Oddham's, still in use by I think it's Mirror Colour Print still. My fascinating fact about this is that it was designed by Yates, Cook and Derbyshire, as a firm of architects, and is modelled on the design of Stockholm City Hall, which is what the bottom right image is. And you can see the similarity. So every time you pass that on the Dome Roundabout, you can think of Stockholm City Hall. There we are. This is just north of the A41, where Sainsbury's is now. This used to be a coal yard, and this was the last remaining freight facility still in use into the 1970s and 80s. Quite a lot of the stone, I think, for the M25 when that was built, was taken away by train via this yard, from what I gather. And I think it was still receiving deliveries of dog food or something ridiculous until quite late. So running up to almost as far as Garston was the freight sidings and the head shunt. Garston Station was an addition in 1966, largely stimulated by the growth of housing in the area. So I suppose you could almost thank Dr. Beeching for that. Whilst the rest of the country was having its branch lines closed down, although the line was at one time slated for closure. They did actually invest in this station as a way of trying to generate extra traffic, which was actually very successful because Garston and Watford North remain, even now, two of the busiest stations on the line. Well, in normal times anyway, but not at the moment. So we come to Bricket Wood, which was one of the original stations, as I said, and originally it was a single platform building with a single platform with a wooden building. Not a lot around it at the time, but what stimulated its development was the opening in 1889 of a fun fair on local land in the grounds of a house called Woodside. This was opened by brothers Henry and William Gray, and they bought up some land, opened this fairground, which they called the Woodside Retreat Fairground. And this stimulated a lot of local Sunday school traffic and sort of tourism, I suppose, really. These were groups of Sunday school children that would come out from London, from Watford, from all over the place. Very popular, as you can see there in the picture. And as a result of this traffic, the London North Western Railway decided they needed to build a bigger station. So in 1903, they built the station. They knocked down the old wooden one and replaced it with the brick one that we all know and love. And this is obviously a similar view from 1903, and you can just see how wonderfully new the building looks. It was furnished with a ladies' waiting room, a gents' waiting room, a parcel office, toilets, all the rest of it. So I'll come on to that later. This is another view of Bricket Wood looking south with one of the London North Western very small tank engines. As you can see, an extremely idyllic scene. Lovely, really is a lovely station, a modeller's paradise. Now I'm just going to slightly divert into the history of miniature railways, because that's another one of my interests. Part of the attraction at Bricket Wood was the opening in 1904 of a 10¼ inch gauge miniature railway. Here's a postcard of it, which I managed to get hold of. And if you will allow me to indulge in some miniature railway history, about 1900, there were two chaps who formed a model engineering partnership in Leavesden Road in Watford. One was called George Flukes. He was an engineer from Yorkshire. And the other one was a chap called Bert Smithies. And he invented a boiler for model steam locos in a small scale. And they built a 10¼ inch gauge steam loco called Nipper, based on the design of someone called Henry Greenley, who at that time was a writer on the Model Engineer magazine. Now that image on the right there is, I think it's Nipper in a future guise. It had a different wheel arrangement, but I think that is an image of Nipper. And Henry Greenley went on to become very famous in miniature railway circles. He essentially started the Romney-Dymchurch Railway and had a lot to do with the Ravenglass and Eskdale, which are still operating miniature railways now. And he lived in Birch Grove in North Watford, Henry Greenley did, for a while. Flukes and Smithies together designed and built rolling stock, and in 1904 they opened the miniature railway at Woodside. And this is thought to be the first commercial miniature railway in the UK. Before that, there'd only been small miniature gauge locos on private estates and so-called tunnel railways. But this actually makes the Bricket Wood miniature railway sort of fairly historically important as they go. Anyway, unfortunately, the line in Bricket Wood closed, and one of the reasons is because the locomotive derailed and broke Mr. Smithy's leg. All the equipment was sold to the famous model supplier Bassett Loke, and it was used by Mr. Bassett Loke on a trial line in Northampton. George Flukes started again at Bricket Wood on his own, with his own equipment, and re-gauged the line to 12-inch gauge. But after the First World War, he moved it all to northward. But some of his equipment actually ended up on the Ruislip-Lido Railway. So the Ruislip-Lido Railway is the bottom left image. That's the link between Bricket Wood and Ruislip-Lido, if anyone's that interested. And my link to miniature railways is that I worked for a long time at the Watford Miniature Railway in Casbury Park, which is also 10¼ inch gauge, and I've still got a connection with it today. It was my Saturday job. And also, slightly spookily, I mentioned that Flukes and Smithies had a workshop in Leavesden Road, and we think, looking down on Leavesden Road, this is where it was, 60 Leavesden Road, which nowadays I think is a dental practice, but it's got all the hallmarks of a sort of courtyard workshop, and I think that's where it used to be. And this here, Leavesden Road Baptist Church, was my parents' church. So all that time I went to church with my parents. I was a couple of minutes walk away from this crucible of miniature railway engineering. Anyway, that impresses me. May not everyone else. This is just to finish on miniature railway. This is my locomotive, which used to run at Watford, and it's being restored. So hopefully this year, if we all get let loose, you can come and see that operating at Watford on the miniature railway in Casbury Park. and the Casby Park Miniature Railway celebrated its 60th anniversary last year. No, year before. Anyway, back to the Abbey line. And Bricket Wood, the demand carried on growing because of the local fun fairs. And in 1913, a passing loop was opened and the second platform was installed to cope with the demand. In 1923, another fairground opened, which was known as Joyland, and this was built by the aptly named Mr. Christmas. But by 1929, unfortunately, both fairgrounds had closed. Mr. Christmas used his leftover land to buy up to build bungalows with their own water supply, which was big news in those days. And that sort of seeded what we now know as modern Bricket Wood. And during the 1950s, Bricket Wood expanded. Houses were built for the employees of Handy Page, who I mentioned earlier, the aircraft manufacturer. So this was images here, obviously Bricket Wood in its heyday. Quite often a trainload of passengers would come in, 12 or 13 carriages, deposit everybody at Bricket Wood, and then the train would go off to St Albans, sit in the sidings. The loco would be replenished with coal and water, and then it would come back later in the day to pick them up. And just some more images here of the station in the 1950s. The top right image shows two push-pull trains passing. The passing loop wasn't used all day. It was only used at peak times, and during the quieter hours, it was went down to single platform operation. Had a lovely little signal box, which didn't change much from the day it was built, and used to win competitions at Bricket Wood for the best kept station. So hopefully with the Bricket Wood Station Trust, we hope to sort of emulate some of that spirit. We'll come on to that later. Bricket Wood also became famous as a filming location. One of the most interesting was in 1937 they filmed Victoria the Great at the station, and the loco at the front claims to be Lion, which was one of the original Liverpool and Manchester Railway locos of 1838. But when you look into the history of that locomotive, it's not entirely, the evidence is not conclusive. It was sold to be a stationary boiler in a dock in Liverpool. It doesn't seem to be any trace of the original, builder's plate or anything like that. So there's two schools of thought as to whether that's original. But anyway, it looks original, and it certainly feels original. It still exists. It ran in the 1980s, even as far it actually went out of normal service something like the 1870s, but it was preserved because of its historical importance. It was revived in the 1920s, and then again in the 1950s, and I think it was finally retired in the 1980s, and it's now in the Liverpool Maritime Museum. Lovely approach to health and safety, as you can see, lots of people all over the track. That was just normal in those days. Other films were filmed here in the 1940s and 50s. I must admit, I don't know any of these, but some people might do. Double Confession, Night of the Demon, She'll Have a Go. That one starred Bob Monkhouse. Up the Creek, and there's a lovely picture of it in the 1950s. Now, going back to some of the rolling stock, the line was the location for a couple of trials of innovative rolling stock for the time. This is a four-wheel rail bus built by ACV. I think this is the second version of it. Although it was pretty advanced for its day, apparently the ride wasn't very good, so it was nicknamed the Flying Brick. It didn't go down very well with passengers. Those of you who know about rolling stock will probably recognise the wheel arrangement of these as being very similar to Pacers, the much maligned invention of British Rail Research, which was done with all best intentions to keep sort of uneconomic branch lines going. But unfortunately, when you design a railway carriage like a freight wagon, it doesn't ride very well. So they were never very popular with passengers. Okay, moving up the line, this is a view of Hyde Lane Crossing. The little crossing keeper's hut here, which is no more, is thought to be possibly part of the original Park Street station. Where the camera is on the top left image is pretty much where Howard Station, the platform, is now. The level crossing is now just a foot crossing, and as you can see how close that crossing keeper's cottage was to the running line. About 10 years ago, someone made contact with me who used to live in, who were actually born and raised in that cottage. There's only one room, so incredible, really. Top view is a view from a Fowler Class 3 loco, obviously approaching the crossing, and obviously the bottom view is Howard Station and one of the cycle shelters put in by the CRP. Park Street Station was slightly more substantial. Obviously had a ticket office, wooden construction. It had a single siding, so it received a very small amount of freight traffic. Not much to say else about that, apart from that on Park Street, but not much left of it now, just a single platform, obviously. And then I suppose the jewel in the crown was St Albans Abbey Station, which, as many people may remember, had a very lovely station building in a Italianate style. It was well equipped, had this lovely overall roof, which was sadly, obviously, taken down like the rest of the station. You look at the station there and you compare it to what it was like in the 1980s, and you think, is it the same planet, really? It's such a shame that was all lost and swept away. But the station itself had a fan of freight sidings. Right next to it was the gasworks, because in those days they used to generate gas locally with coke. So the coke and coal was brought in by train and obviously generated the gas, very environmentally unfriendly, but that obviously sustained the line for a long time, that freight traffic. The line also did quite a healthy trade in injured horses during the First World War, because just opposite the station, and it's still there actually, is a vet's, a firm of vets. That used to be quite a lot more extensive than it is now. Used to have stables, and they used to take horses that had been maimed in the First World War, which came in by train, and they would obviously fix them and recuperate them, and then they would go back out to the front line. And just as you can see in the top of the image there, that line going off to the left is the old Great Northern Railway line to Hatfield. And the Great Northern Railway services used to operate out of the Bay platform, which was on the backside of it was only ever a single platform at St Albans Abbey, but the Great Northern services operated from the back of the platform in the Bay platform. Here's an image of that rail tour again, which was obviously of pretty substantial length, just to show the extent of the sidings. So that's a sort of potted history up the line. Now we come on to the period during which things contracted, fell to pieces, nearly shut the line down. Sort of runs from 1963 to 1983, so a period of 20 years when the line was really, in rather a sad decline. So in the 1950s and 60s, the line was worked by a mixture of steam and diesel multiple unit, DMUs. It would be typically steam for the heavier peak hour services, and then DMUs for the off-peak services. And the DMUs that worked on the branch in the 1960s, there were all kinds of, all various types. In the 1950s and 60s, British Rail tried out an awful lot of different designs, some of which they designed in-house, others were subcontracted. It was the same with the locomotive stock at the time. There were lots of different diesel locomotives being tried. And there was a lot of diversity of rolling stock in the 1960s. Here you can see, I think these are the Derby lightweight, they call the Derby lightweight units, but there was class 105, class 101. All the DMUs were provided by Bletchley Depot, which was 30 miles to the north of Watford. So the line sort of got what it got. It was, whatever was left after the rest of the London Midland region had been given trains. The Abbey line got whatever was left over, which isn't unlike the situation today. Just out of interest, this footbridge, when the station was reduced back down to a single platform, the footbridge ended up at a station on the North London line. I think it was Canonbury. I may be wrong, but the footbridge remained there until about 2008 when it was finally replaced as part of the London Overground upgrade. So a little bit of Bricket Wood survived. But this is what it became. Oh, excuse the wording on the picture. You can just make out there the remains of the second platform and the fence posts, which you can still see in the undergrowth when you go there today. As I say, in 1963, the line was earmarked for closure under beaching, but the housing development at Watford pretty much saved it from that. And in 1966, Garston opened. But in 1965, the line had gone down to single line working. And about the same time, all the stations were reduced to unstaffed halts. So at that point, tickets were issued by the guard on the train, which has obviously continued to the present day. 1966 saw the demolition of a lot of the infrastructure. Signal boxes went to St Albans, at Bricket Wood, at Watford North. The Abbey station was demolished. The Great Northern Line, Hatfield Line, was severed. The Bricket Wood passing loop was padlocked out of use and eventually removed. Watford North Station received its half barriers. Freight trains ordinary freight trains, the pickup freight trains had stopped in 1964. The goods yard at Bricket Wood and Park Street, they both closed in 1965. And then finally in 1971, the gasworks closed at St Albans. So at that point, there was no longer any need for the coal trains. As I said earlier, the freight sidings at Watford North, they continued for a bit longer. The site of what's now Sainsbury's was known as the Lee Farm Concentration Depot. That stopped handling freight in April 1970, but heating oil, heavy heating oil was continued. So, sort of shipments of pedigree dog food began to arrive in September 1987, of all things. Not a very odd thing to sort of seal off the history of the freight on the Branch line, dog food, but anyway. And stone for the M25, as I mentioned. But eventually that yard closed in 1988, and it's now covered by Sainsbury's. Here's another very bleak picture of Bricket Wood. It happens to be snowing, which doesn't help. But this was the state of the line, and again, Abbey Station, very forlorn, single bus shelter, and of course during this period the line suffered a lot of vandalism, a lot of antisocial behaviour, and it really got the line a reputation which I don't think it's ever really shaken off. Of course, once you unstaff all the stations, there's no one looking over, no one watching out for the passengers. So, the ne'er-do-wells can have free rein. And in 1975, the Sunday service was taken away. Well, that didn't last long. That was in October. In December, the Sunday service was put back again after sort of vociferous opposition and protests involving rail unions. And I suppose that was the genesis of the rail user group movement. But the reinstated service had to be subsidised by St Albans District Council, the Watford Borough Council, all the local councils really. And the only one who didn't contribute was Hertfordshire County Council, who said that residents would just be riding up and down for the sake of it, just to keep the subsidy going. So anyway, I'm sure that's not the opinion now. Here's a few images of the M25 being built. Again, the M25 at the time, or for a short while, was a bit of a threat to the line's existence. I think the authorities didn't want to have to build an expensive bridge over the M25. They wanted to truncate the service at Bricket Wood. But thankfully, common sense prevailed. So what they had to do was they had to divert the line temporarily, had to slew it to the right there. This is, I think, looking north towards St Albans, dig the great big cutting for the road, put the bridge in, and then put the line back over across the bridge, and then excavate where the line had been temporarily aligned to. So, yeah, that was a pretty impressive bit of engineering, which sort of goes unnoticed today. But thankfully, the line didn't shut at Bricket Wood. And that brings you up to 1983 really, and the early attempts to improve the line. and I suppose what might be counted as the dawn of ABFLY. Now, ABFLY didn't start in 1983. I hasten to add, it started in 1995, but I shall try and take you through some of the preliminary steps. So, in 1989, there was an attempt to relocate St Albans Abbey Station further down the line towards Watford by the BR Property Board. So this would take it away from the main road, St Stephen's Hill. And the idea was that the site of the station could be sold off for property development. So a local protest group was formed by Dr. Audrey Ogilvie, known as ASTAG, Abbey Station Action Group. And she fought a very intense battle with the BR Property Board, which was eventually won. And it ended up with a public inquiry. And the station was saved. And we've got Audrey to thank for the reason the station is still there today. But that wasn't the end of the threat to the line. In 1995, there was a threat by British Rail to replace what had then become an electric train service. I've sort of skipped over the fact the line was electrified in 1988, which was very good for the line because you have what's called the Sparks effect. It's a well-known thing when you electrify a railway line and increase the service quality, it tends to generate more people using it. So despite the fact the line had been electrified in 1988, in 1995, BR proposed to replace the trains with diesels again, which seems ridiculous now, but was a real threat. They also withdrew the late night service at that point. Although the electric trains weren't replaced, thankfully, the late night services were. So I think the last 3 trains of the day running up to midnight were cut on the grounds of antisocial behaviour. The actual end-to-end journey time got a little bit longer, and the Sunday service was also threatened again with the chop. So the Abbey Station Action Group, led by by Audrey and her husband David, morphed into ABFLY, the Abbey Fly Users Group, and David Ogilvie became the first chairman. And I think the aims of ABFLY haven't really changed since then. These are the main. Well, I can't really speak for ABFLY today because I've not been directly involved for a couple of years now, 3 or 4 years now. But the principles are the same. The service frequency is off-putting as it currently is every 40 minutes. I'm talking before COVID, obviously. The lack of trains running in until quite late puts people off using them to go to London, for example. We did have some success in getting 1 train back under London Midland, but you still can't really get back to St Albans after 11 o'clock, if I remember rightly. Smarter trains, well, that has generally happened, I think. I think the quality of the trains now, partly thanks to privatisation, has improved. And with the imminent advent of the 350s on the line, which I'll come to later, the quality will be even better. Through services, yes, that's an interesting one. When Watford Junction was re-signalled about 10 years ago, the fully signalled connection was put back in. So you can actually run services right through onto the main line now, whereas previously, between 1960s and 1990s, the branch line train had to shunt onto the branch line, so you couldn't run through services with passengers. They would have had to shunt the train, disembark on platform 11, shunt the train onto the main line, and then get the passengers back on again. Well, you've got the signalling now to do a through service. But a lot of that depends on capacity on the main line. Then the sort of more generic things like improvement of security, improving revenue collection, all things that have been campaigned for a long time, and over the years, improvements have come along, and then it's kind of, got worse again. It's a little bit cyclic, some of this stuff, but essentially the aims of ABFLY I don't think have really changed too much, and some things have been achieved, but others we're still waiting. Oh yes, here we are. So one of the most vociferously opposed ideas has been the guided bus idea. Now, personally speaking, as an engineer, I think these are the absolute worst of both worlds. Why would you put a bus into a concrete trough? The benefits of a bus is that you can steer them and they can go anywhere. So why on earth constrain them to run in a concrete trough with all the extra wear and tear? Conversely, why, when you've got a railway that's electrified, steel wheels and steel rail, would you opt for a rubber tyre on concrete solution, which is noisier, less energy efficient, diesel powered, da-di-da-di-da? So personally, I think guided buses are extremely misguided. The only real use for them is in built up urban areas where you want to run buses at high speed down narrow streets, and you want to take away the variation tolerance in the driver's ability to steer in a straight line. But really, they're not suitable for places where you've got electrified railways. And even more so these days, when you've got electrified railway, you do not want to give it up, because the cost of electrification has gone through the roof. As a lot of train up Network Rail have found, about 10 years ago, there was a massive push to electrify a lot of railways in this country, which is the right thing to do in my view. But because we hadn't done it for so many years, we had to relearn all the skills, buy in all the expertise from abroad, and consequently costs went through the roof. And a lot of electrification schemes were then cancelled. So due to the boom and bust mentality of investment in this country, we don't get things right. But building a guided busway is definitely not a good thing to do, as they found on the Cambridge to St Ives route, where they converted an old railway line into a guided busway, and it was delayed. There were lots of problems with the concrete. I mean, the pouring of the concrete itself is horrendously environmentally unfriendly because of the CO2 emissions. Anyway, I think I've ranted enough about guided busways. I can rant some more. On a more positive note, in the mid-2000s, there was a recognition that branch lines and rural railways really held a lot of value, which was not properly recognised. A lot of this started with the Settle to Carlisle route, which in the 1980s was going to be closed down by British Rail. And Michael Portillo, the rail minister at the time, really went against the grain and against the prevailing tide, and managed to save the line. And subsequently, British Rail invested in it, Network Rail invested in it, and it's become a real asset to the rail network. Well, that kind of spawned the community rail movement, i.e. local people taking an interest in their line, not just for using it as a train service, but all the things that go around the local railway. So, the benefits it brings for connecting people, including inclusiveness, involving local children, etc., etc. So, in about the year 2004, there was the Department for Transport launched what was called the Community Rail Development Strategy, and this was the aspiration was to bring new life to local lines through a variety of methods, and the Abbey line was selected as one of the pilot projects, which was very good. And the Abbey line pilot project was testing the concept of community rail in a sort of semi-urban environment. A lot of the other community rail pilot projects were sort of very rural routes in the north or whatever, but the Abbey line, as a fairly short branch line, was testing the concept in an urban setting. So various parties came together. Hertfordshire County Council sort of took the lead, supported by the train operator at the time. It was Silverlink. Watford Borough Council, St Albans District Council, various others, ABFLY obviously, and I was involved, not officially really, but as part of representing ABFLY, I was involved in the early steering group sessions, and we set up a couple of things. One was a station adoption group at Watford North, so we were kind of like the first to set up the Watford North Station Adopters, and other projects were funded and took place. A lot of sort of school engagement work, art projects, free trips on the line for nurseries and schools and all the rest of it, really to open people's eyes to the fact there was a railway there, because a lot of people just didn't know that the railway was there, didn't know that a service existed. In the early years, it was pretty successful. The ridership did go up. There was a lot of special events, Santa specials, Easter specials. There was some investment in some sort of furniture. There was some new station signs at Watford North, road signs promoting or indicating where the stations were, because again, that was another bit of a failing, that people didn't know where the stations were, even though they might have just been behind their back fence. There's a couple of road signs there. There's one that fell over. Some investment in bike parks, bike shelters, all that took place. But on the slightly more heavy duty side, the level crossing was replaced in 2006, which in some ways was good, in the sense that the life expired machinery was replaced. In another way, it was slightly a bit of a retrograde step, because whereas the old system, or the old level crossing, was the way it operated was basically, as soon as the driver received a green light, he or she could sail across the crossing at full line speed. Now, the new level crossing, this is a quirk of railway operation, operates slightly differently. The barriers, the warning lights go and the bell goes, the barriers come down, and then the driver receives a flashing white light. But that doesn't mean he can sail across the crossing with his eyes shut. He is then responsible for making sure the crossing is clear. What that means is that the train has to now approach from the St Albans direction a lot more cautiously, which actually added to the journey time. So unfortunately, that didn't really help the efficient operation of the branch. It led to defensive driving, and especially in slippery conditions. So yeah, nice to have a level crossing. Shame it wasn't to the same standard as the previous one, but anyway, what's done is done. St Albans Abbey, as a result of CRP and train operator investment, received a lovely new shelter and a ticket machine in, I think this was 2006, going back a bit now. But that was a very welcome development. So the station there is much more welcoming. I think every station has now got a ticket machine, so that's been a good development. So where we are now, really, just to reaching the sort of 3/4 way through the presentation, AbFly is still going strong. Like I said, I'm not directly involved, so these screenshots of the website are a few years old now, but I think the website turned out to be a pretty useful tool for reaching people. This was before we had things like Zoom webinars, but obviously having an online presence is the future and the present. Here's a lovely image I think that Richard created of I think still campaigning for a passing loop. So here's a computer generated image of what that might look like. It's very nice. And yes, right, let me talk a little bit about the Bricketwood Station Heritage Trust. Now, the Bricketwood Station, what is the last survivor of the steam age on the line, so it's always held a fascination for me. I always used to go past it on the train thinking, what a shame it's all bricked up, and wouldn't it be lovely if that was a lovely cafe or something, something that's got some life in it. It survived. It became a storeroom for the builder's merchant next door, which became Travis Perkins. Interestingly, Travis Perkins have now moved out, so the site is now up for sale. It might even have been sold, but the site next door anyway. But it was on my bucket list of things to do. So in about 2016, I made some inquiries with some local people who I knew were interested in doing this. Actually, the first attempt was about 2009, but what had been a sticking point was getting in contact with Network Rail. No one actually knew who owned the building. We weren't sure whether it was Network Rail or the train operator. And once we got the interested group of people together, which became the Bricketwood, the trustees, which I'm now chairman of, the first thing to do was find out who was responsible for the station. And sure enough, we spoke to Network Rail and they said, well, it belongs to the train operator. And we spoke to the train operator and they said, well, it belongs to Network Rail. So it took us about 6 months to find out who had the key to the back door. But luckily enough, we had Robert York on our trustees, or still have. And Robert was only recently retired from Network Rail property division, I think. So we couldn't have got luckier with Robert on board. Robert knew who to speak to in Network Rail, eventually found out who had the key, and eventually found out whose lease the station was part of. And we discovered that the station building itself was part of Network Rail's lease, not the train operator. The canopy itself is part of the station lease. So the canopy is supported by the building, and the building conversely holds up the canopy. So there's a bit of a interface there. But once we'd ascertained who was responsible for the building, we could start talking to them. So we've been working feverishly, well, Robert's been working feverishly for the last 3 years to try and get a lease out of Network Rail. And 2 years ago, they agreed in principle to give us a 99-year lease, peppercorn rent, which is fantastic. But getting them to the point of actually signing a lease has been extremely arduous. We think we're just a few weeks away now. Anyway, so I'll come back to that, but let's talk a bit more about the station. Here it is, probably about 10 years ago, with a Class 321, and what makes it special is not just the building, but the canopy. If the canopy wasn't there, the station wouldn't really have any character. But because it's got this canopy, albeit it was cut back a little bit for the electric wires, it has the potential to be a bit of a destination. This is, you've seen this before. This is the 1950s view of it. But what we hope to do is restore it as close to as it was in the when it was first built under London North Western Railway. So what you won't see is the British Rail style sausage dog, hot dog type totem signs. We're gonna go back even further to London North Western Railway style, really to honour the history of the building. Now on the inside, there's not much left. Well, nothing at all. It's just an empty shell. There is one partition wall which is not original down the end. All of that rotten-looking roof since fell down since that picture was taken. But thankfully, Network Rail replaced the roof quite recently, so we haven't got to worry about that. It's just a plywood roof with felt on the top. But the inside is a blank canvas. So we're not going to try and recreate every single detail on the inside. That would be silly. We need to adapt this for modern purposes. These are some architects' images of what the finished building will look like. Obviously, this is a little bit of a glossy finish. I'll probably never get the brickwork to look that clean. But what we propose to do is turn it into a community hub, and not long afterwards, hopefully into a cafe, Edwardian themed cafe. So the vision is that we will, we'll be open in the morning for commuters, serving takeaway, snacks, hot drinks, whatever. But if you want to sit in at a nice table with a plug to charge your laptop and some free Wi-Fi, tea in proper mugs, cakes and biscuits, cakes and sandwiches on proper plates, then that's the vision. And there's plenty of places around the UK that have done this now to old station buildings. So with a bit of luck, that will be a real attraction. We've been inspired by a couple of places. One is Ridgemont Station on the Bedford-Bletchley line, and they've opened a little cafe in their old station building, which has been successful. And very much like Bricket Wood, there's no real passing trade, and you can't rely on passing footfall because it's on the edge of the village, and the train service is only every 40 minutes. But what we aim to do is make it a destination where people will actually want to come. And obviously, when all this COVID stuff is over, they'll want to come and spend some time, whether they're a rail user or not. So there's a lot of support for this project now, and very happily, we've secured agreement from none other than the train operator, West Midlands Trains, for £250,000 to restore the building. Now that we can't actually receive the first chunk of money until we've actually got the lease from Network Rail. So we pulled out all the stops at the moment to get this lease sorted with Network Rail, at which point we can receive the first chunk of money, and all being well, we'll have the building restored by the end of this year. So at long last, things are happening. I know it's been very quiet, but that's because we've been beavering in the background to try and get this lease. We've got planning permission, that's all sorted, and we've got the money, pretty much. So it's just that lease. So if anyone knows anyone high up in Network Rail, please tell them to get their finger out. On the outside of the building, we're hoping to, put back all the lovely sash windows, the wooden doors, the chimneys. At the north end, the chimney will be a real chimney because the chimney stack is still there. So that will be an extractor for the kitchen area. The other two chimneys will be dummy chimneys made of GRP with a brick slip around the outside. So you wouldn't know they were dummy chimneys, but obviously they're not real. But we want to recreate the look. We won't have jurisdiction over the canopy But in due course, we hope to sort of lobby the train operator and say, okay, can we, for example, replace the horrible barge, the flat boarding at the front with the nice pointy barge boarding? Can we perhaps put up some, heritage signs, heritage lighting? There's a lot you can do to bring back the original feel of the station, while still working around the fact it's an operational station. Anyway, that's for the future. This is again an artist's impression of the inside. It'll have a fully accessible toilet, not as shown there. The plan has changed a bit. It'll be a bit further down to give a slightly more open plan feel. But there'll be a counter at this end. It's a narrow space, so it's not the easiest of space to make sense of. But we've seen examples of other stations where good things have been done in like I say, it's all about the product that you offer. I think it's all about the feel, the quality of the service. It's not going to be a greasy spoon. It's going to be as high quality as we can make it without being overpriced. We just want to make it a lovely cafe where people go, oh yeah, we'll go to the station cafe or whatever it's called, rather than McDonald's or something. You never know. And in doing so, hopefully we'll bring life back to the station and deter antisocial behaviour, deter vandalism, encourage more people to use the trains, all that good stuff, which should be stimulated. So we have a website if you want to go and have a look. It's created by the same people that created the AdFly website, because they're so good. It's got details of our plans. It's got details of the history. We keep a blog, although we've not updated it recently. I must apologise, but all the information you need is there. Please consider joining us as a member. It's only £10 a year, and if we can raise lots of money, we can actually start the work before we get the lease, or we can commence some of the sort of tendering process. We need to raise about £5,000 to get the work started now. We'll get that with the first tranche of train operator money, but it'd be nice to start the work now, some of the detailed design. So to wrap up, I thought I would just touch on what the future might hold. And, I should stress that these are purely my own opinion. Some of it, might be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, because why not? Start with a bit of a negative, I suppose. At the moment, we've got a perfect storm. We've got lots of things that are and will continue to put a squeeze on rail revenues. And to be perfectly honest, I think, there's a real threat here, to the, I suppose, what I've described as, already shaky viability of this and other loss-making branch lines. It's no secret that the Abbey line doesn't make a profit. It probably never has. But, thankfully, the Department for Transport and everyone else has seen fit to keep it running for social reasons. And the rest of the franchise, or rest of the rail franchise, kind of props it up. But there aren't actually many profit-making railways in this country. Even the big commuter operators going in and out of London struggle to make a profit, and that was before COVID. So where we are now, with lockdown and all the rest of it, apart from the fact that railways are hardly carrying any people, working from home is definitely here to stay. So I can't see train usage being as popular as it once was, at least not even after the vaccine and after we've come out of lockdown. I think there'll still be a gradual recovery. And then Brexit, of course, we don't know what that's going to do to London employment, particularly in the sort of finance and services industry. That's still got to sort of work through. It might be an opportunity, it might not. We're obviously in a very deep recession now, and that's going to continue. Rail franchising has officially ended in its current form. It was on its deathbed before COVID, and COVID finished it off. So it's looking likely that, the government will be a lot more closely involved for the foreseeable future, which some may see as a good thing and others may see as a bad thing. But, there'll be a lot more direct Treasury attention paid to economics of operating the railway. And on top of all that, there's an urgent need to decarbonise, the whole economy, really. And there's a need to reduce energy usage as part of that to meet our net zero decarbonisation targets. So, that's a lot of challenges which the rail network is not immune to. It can't be taken for granted that people will always travel by train. And that's, I think, something we need to accept. So to continue the negative, I'll come to the positive in a minute. This will lead to less money available for rail investment, a greater focus probably on cutting losses. And when I say losses, I mean both the financial losses and the energy losses. Be harder to make a business case for investment. And on top of all that, the cost of electric cars is coming down. And, the greenness of rail can't be assumed forever. And this is one of the reasons why there's in 2018, Joe Johnson, who's Boris Johnson's brother, when he was rail minister, I think, or transport minister, declared that all diesel trains would be gone from the rail network by 2040. So speaking as an engineer in the rail network, that presents us with a very big challenge. And one of the things that Viva Rail is involved in is, delivering solutions, a horrible word, but delivering, a way out of or an antidote for diesel trains. Not that it's a problem on the Abbey line, of course. Now, on the plus side, it's not all bad. HS2 is going ahead. And this, as you know, is a lot of the countryside is, whether you object to it or not, it's happening. It's going to be a massive relief to capacity on the West Coast Main Line. Unfortunately, HS2 didn't do itself any favours in the early days. It didn't sell the benefits very well. The actual main benefit of HS2 is not getting to Birmingham faster. It's about relieving congestion on the existing rail network, which includes the West Coast Main Line. But the benefits of HS2 go a long way. Now, on the West Coast Main Line, basically, the fast lines will be freed up for more semi-stoppers and stopping services, and freight as well. And this gives the Abbey line particular opportunity to run through services, if that seemed to be the thing to do. But one of the reasons why through services has always been poo-pooed is that there's not enough capacity on the West Coast Main Line. So as soon as HS2 opens, albeit in 2026, so a few years off now, the capacity generated on the West Coast Main Line will be a great opportunity. And also, of course, you've got a benefit on the West Coast Main Line that you're directly linked into HS2, into Euston. So, you could step on a train at Bricket Wood, be in Euston, in half an hour, and you could be on a high-speed train to Leeds or something, not long after that. So it's a big opportunity. Equally, Crossrail, much delayed, but will open soon. Will be, another opportunity that could be capitalised on. East-West Rail. Now, the Abbey line has been recognised, I think, more recently as valuable for east-west journeys. Now, we all know if you want to go from east to west in the country by train, you normally have to go into London and out again. There's not many opportunities to go cross-country unless you're at Bletchley and you can go across to Bedford, or when East-West Rail is actually opened, it will incorporate the Bedford-Bletchley line, and it will link Oxford and Cambridge again. I've got an idea on that, which I'll come on to a bit later. Also, car ownership and usage is actually declining, and particularly amongst young people who can't really, for better or worse, can't really afford to run a car anymore. So there is still a demand for high quality public transport. I just don't think it's going to be as high as it has been for some time. So let's hope the economy recovers and employment in London goes up again, and that there's a lot of demand for public transport. And also at the moment there's a focus on levelling up, as Boris says, the regions, which I think is a good thing. Whether Hertfordshire considers itself to be part of the regions, I don't know, but you're outside of London just about. So there could be, we ought to make the case really for greater investment in railways away from London. So that could help your case. But I think there's probably a need to really question, what is the Abbey line for these days? Is it about London commuting, or is it about local journeys? Is it better integrated as part of the mainline operation, or is the rail corridor better off as a standalone operation? Do people really care about staying in the same seat for the whole journey, as long as their connections are good? If you look at London Overground and Underground, most people are quite happy to go into London and change trains, or change from underground to overground several times to get where they need to be. And the reason for that is because the connection's so good. You haven't got to wait more than a couple of minutes. You might have to walk a little bit, but you haven't got to wait more than a couple of minutes for your connection. So, and this is my controversial question number one. Is through running really that important? Perhaps it's more important to have a higher frequency service which connects really well at Watford Junction, so you can step off the Abbey line and straight onto the next train, which post HS2 could be a very high frequency service. You need to think about that trade-off. Also, there's always been a bit of a tension between peak flows, and what I mean by that is, you need a long train for accommodating one or two busy trains a day, but the rest of the time it runs empty. So perhaps there's an argument there for higher frequency, shorter trains. If one train is 4 cars long, but you can actually run two 2-car trains on a much higher frequency, is that actually better as a service than one long train, which runs empty most of the day? Is there a solution which might deliver both? Perhaps you can couple up a couple of short units just for the peak hours, and then split them apart again for the rest of the day. And what's the best way? This is very important. What's the best way to get people from the Abbey line to their actual destination, the so-called last mile? And that is an aspect of public transport that quite often gets overlooked. It's all very well having a railway from St Albans to Watford with 6 intermediate stations or whatever it is, but if people are inconvenienced by the final part of the journey, then they won't bother. Going back to rolling stock, this is an example of the sort of quandary which I think you might be in a little bit. This is a class 350, and these pictures were sent to me by Peter Brooks. This was the trial run. I understand that the train operator is thinking of bringing these into use on the Abbey line, which is all very nice because they're lovely units. I mean, they're lovely, comfortable, air-conditioned trains for the passenger. Wonderful. However, is this really the right thing for the Abbey line? Because, they're 176 tonnes, each 4-car train, 176 tonnes, and they can operate up to 110 miles an hour, which is absolutely overkill for the Abbey line, which is only a 50-mile-an-hour branch line. If you work that out in terms of tonnage per passenger, the peak, I looked back through some of the passenger surveys from recent years, and the peak passenger load is around about 139, 140. So that works out at 1.3 tonnes per passenger. But the average load is only 27 people per train, which is a whopping 6.5 tonnes per passenger. And I'm not sure that's sustainable. When you compare it to a bus, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but that's a bus, typical single-decker bus, 14 tonnes, 27 passengers. I've done it all on 27 passengers as a fair comparison, not the actual capacity of the vehicle. That's 0.5 tonnes per passenger. A nice tram, which personally would be my favoured option for the Abbey line, and I'm gutted that it never got off the ground back in 2009 when the line was almost converted to light rail. But 2-car tram is 40 tonnes. That's only 1.5 tonnes per passenger. Or the little Parry People Mover, which is a rail vehicle operating on the Stourbridge branch line, which can carry something like 45 people, and that's only 0.4 tonnes per passenger. So, compare that to this whopping beast of a class 350, and you have to think, is that the right thing for the Abbey line? Of course, if you're running through services, it is, and that's fine. But if the focus is if the focus is generating local journeys, then you might want to think about a different solution. So just to finish off now, I've got a couple of ideas, possible opportunities, and this is where I get my colouring book out, as a lot of rail enthusiasts like to do. But hopefully these aren't completely ridiculous. This is the section of east-west rail between Bedford and Cambridge. The light green sort of irregular shape running from Bedford across St Neots and across to Cambridge is the preferred is the area of the preferred routes between the two towns. There used to be a railway line between Bedford and Cambridge, closed by Beeching, so it's not going to take exactly the same route as that. But as you can see, it looks like the line is going to come north out of Bedford and then across to St Neots, where it meets the East Coast Main Line, and then there'll be an interchange, and then across and up into Cambridge, where it meets the East Anglian Main Line. So I think there's possible opportunity here. If you restore the Knapsbury link, which is currently not obstructed by any development, and ran semi-fast trains from Watford Junction via what might be perhaps the St Albans South Parkway station, roughly where the Handley Page Airfield is, you could then go into St Albans City, so you could directly link the Abbey Line with the Midland Main Line. Then you could go up through Luton and Bedford, and then turn right and go across, stopping at the St Neots, for interchange with the East Coast Main Line, and then across to Cambridge. So you'd actually have connections between the West Coast Main Line, the Midland Main Line, the East Coast Main Line, and the East Anglian Main Line, which is something you're not going to have other than if you go into London. And you'd also then have access to very high-tech jobs in the Cambridge area. Of course, what that possibly would mean, I've just put it on the map here. I'll go back a step. So this is the East West Rail as it currently stands. So it off to the left is Oxford and Aylesbury, which is reopened line that's been mothballed. So that's being rebuilt. Then you've got the central section between Bletchley and Bedford, which, as you know, is obviously an operational railway. Then you've got the new line between Bedford, St Neots and Cambridge. So that just shows what East West Rail is, and construction of that has already started. Then I've just superimposed my idea. You've got Watford Junction up the Abbey Line, the Knapsbury link, St Albans City, up to Bedford and across. So for relatively little infrastructure investment in the Knapsbury link, which is only a couple of miles long on railway formation that's essentially there, you open up a lot of opportunity here. Of course, it would need the agreement of East West Rail Company. It would need the agreement of other train operators. But now that the railways are effectively nationalised, it may be much easier to make the case for this sort of investment. The downside is that St Albans Abbey Station would be out on a limb. And I wouldn't dare suggest that you would perhaps close that length of line and make it into a footpath or something. But that's the only downside. It's a bit like the Croxley Link. They were going to close Watford Met Station. Anyway, just an idea. And I say you could probably park a new Parkway station, Park and Ride, which would essentially serve the area to the south of St Albans, linked to the A405, the M25 even. It could serve quite a wide catchment area. So yeah, that's my idea. Another opportunity is linking, perhaps a lower cost opportunity, is to link the two stations in St Albans. Now, mentioned earlier the Hatfield line, and Abfly have campaigned for a long time for a bus link between the two stations. The problem with the bus link is it has to go up into St Albans city centre, where it gets stuck in traffic. And a trial was run a couple of years ago, subsidised by, I can't remember, but anyway, it's subsidised. It wasn't terribly well promoted, to be fair, but uptake wasn't great, and it died a death. However, here's an idea: you could have these autonomous pods running between Abbey Station and St Albans City, and you could run them on a section of dedicated path. They go along the Abbey Line for a little bit, and then go off to the left along the Alban Way for a short distance, under the Midland Main Line, and then up to St Albans City Station. And these autonomous pods are battery powered. They're in use at Heathrow Terminal 5. There's a British company that makes them called Westfield. They're rubber tired, so they obviously run on a tarmac track. But you could have maybe 2 or 3 of these which operate on demand, shuttling people backwards and forwards. And of course, you can start small, so you can have 2 or 3 basic service. But if demand grows, you could just buy a couple more. They are unmanned in terms of people on board, but there's a control center in the background, watching over things with CCTV. They automatically dock in a charging station, either at one end or both ends. So that would be perhaps an interesting development, and most of it would be off-road, as I say, on the old railway line. and you could still keep the old railway line open to cyclists and walkers. You just have to have a fence down the middle. So perhaps that's a cheaper way of linking the two stations in the short term. Of course, if demand was really great, you could put a Parry people mover in, and you could relay the rail connection. But of course, you wouldn't be able to get it off the old Alban Way and up to St Albans City Station very easily. So that's it, really. Just to finish with this lovely picture, going back to steam days of locomotive built by the London North Western Railway, formerly in passenger service, and it latterly became in sort of departmental use. And the reason I put it there is because it's called Engineer Watford, and I'm an engineer from Watford, and one day I'm going to build a model of this. So thought that was an appropriate place to finish. So I'll shut up now and listen for the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David. That was brilliant. And I don't know if you've had a chance to, well, you probably haven't even a chance to draw a breath and have a drink, but the comments coming through just shows how widely appreciated that talk was. We've had over 70 people join tonight, which is staggering, actually, far more than we've ever had before. Okay. And some really very positive comments, just obviously the depth of your knowledge right across the board, both historical, engineering, and particularly the technical bits about the Abbey line in particular have clearly been widely appreciated. I see we've had a wide variety of people coming from all sorts of backgrounds, not just rail as well. I think quite a few people who are into museums and archives have also joined in.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much indeed for that. There's hardly any questions. I don't know if you've picked up any, Richard, from anything there?
There's been lots of positive comments. There's a couple of people who put their hands up. So if we want to give it a try and let them ask their question verbally, let's see if they'd like to do that.
Yes, I was interested in what you said about the weight of the rolling stock on the St Albans Abbey line, and I'm rather surprised that you didn't advocate the use of the new Viva Rail stock.
Well, actually, I don't think the Viva Rail stock is necessarily the right solution, because me with my Viva Rail hat on, we specialise in self-powered trains, i.e. battery-powered trains. And of course, the Abbey line's got overhead electric wires. So I'd say whatever you do, don't lose the overhead wires. Once you've got them, do not use them. The slight problem is there's nothing on the market. There's no 2-car overhead electric trains on the market at the moment. There were 3-car electric. The Class 313s, I think, were the last overhead electric EMUs. We were going to develop a pantograph battery hybrid train, so it could use a pantograph under the wires and then run on batteries off the wire. And we were developing that for about 6 months last year, but we put that on hold for now. The rolling stock itself, the Class 230 body shell would be pretty appropriate for the line because it's lightweight, it's aluminium, it's got very high acceleration rates. But unfortunately, we don't do an overhead electric version. So if we did, I would certainly be advocating it.
There's just one other thing I'd like to tell you. This is not a question, but it is an observation. Many years ago, my father managed to blag a ride in the cab of those appalling AC 4-wheel rail cars.
Oh, really?
And he rode all the way from Watford Junction to the Abbey, filming it on his 9.5mm home movie.
Oh, wow.
And when the film came back from processing, it was absolutely and completely unwatchable because of the enormous camera shake caused by this falling ride.
Yeah.
Dreadful, it really was.
Well, it's not unlike the trains on the Isle of Wight, which Viva Rail are building the new trains for the Isle of Wight, as you might know.
Yes, I understand.
And they're replacing the old 483 tube stock, which used to run on the Northern Line, I think it was. It might have been Bakerloo, actually, but I went for a cab ride on one of them.
I drove one of those once on the Northern Line.
Did you? Well, I went for a ride on one last year on the 483s, and the track quality on the Isle of Wight is so bad that I hit my head on the roof of the cab as we went through a track dip. So, yeah, it's I can imagine.
Cool. Now we've got Sarah, who I think has a question as well.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting Watford Museum along tonight. I've learnt so much, and it's wonderful, and all your extra sort of information about the story. Obviously, I'm not so good on the technical information, but it's absolutely amazing. One thing that I wanted to say is more actually, rather than a question, it's something to let you know about. Is you mentioned the old station house on St Albans Road. We've been involved in that project. We obviously weren't involved in the decision to make a whopping great big skyscraper right next to it, but the ideas did improve from originally they were talking about putting that building in a glass box inside a skyscraper. So it's like, wow. But anyway, we have been involved in that project. We've been looking behind the scenes, and I've been working with the developers. And actually, the site is earmarked for Pope's Yard Brewery, who you might know of, you might have come across, who sell amazing ale. So a little plug for them as well, and are locally based. And they were looking for a tap room. So the idea is that eventually it will be able to be reopened as somewhere that people can visit as well. So, but not in competition, I'm glad to say, with a cafe. Which sounds like a brilliant idea.
Enough, when we've only really just started thinking about the cafe at Bricket Wood, how it might operate. So we haven't decided yet whether it's going to be kind of run by volunteers or franchised out. But we want to maintain the vision of keeping it as a sort of Edwardian type tea room. But what it would be really nice if we could bring in local suppliers. So like Flourish Bakery on the Grey Canes estate.
Yeah, they're amazing.
It'd be great if they could supply us with bread, and you could even put it on the train and send it from Watford North to Bricket Wood. That'd be quite nice.
Well, that's the kind of thing. And those local connections, it's like we now work with even like a local t-shirt company that are basing designs on local architecture and heritage and things like that, because it's actually now reasonably cool to like these sorts of things. So you're getting lots more younger people involved.
Yeah, thank
Dave,
you,
I think you've got a question as well.
Thanks. Firstly, Dave, thanks very much for that. That was a great talk. I can tell that by looking at what the time is and thinking, bloody hell, it's late. What I was going to actually mention was last Community Rail Partnership meeting, we were talking about this issue of the demand for the line and your concerns in terms of whether the trade will come back, whether the passengers will come back after COVID. And one of the things that I think we came to the conclusion on is that the economic demand for the use of the line is very, very elastic. It's very noticeable that if it's a bus alternative, even though the bus only takes 5 minutes more, it destroys the usage of the line. Yeah. And in our view, the increase of a regular service from 40 minutes to 30 minutes, which is probably, if you want to keep clock times on timetables, is what you're going to get with the thing, is likely to be a substantial increase in use, as will the connectivity. So these things are much more important on lines where there's lots of alternatives. You can catch the bus, you can drive. So the extra 2 or 3 minutes makes a hell of a difference.
You've got to aim to make it absolutely impossible not to use the line. If you want to go to St Albans or Watford or beyond, it's got to be so easy just to walk up, get on, catch a train. And that's why the end-to-end, the last mile thing is so important as well. But everyone, that's the well-known thing. That's nothing. That's not rocket science. It's just, I think you'll need to do a lot more in that respect to bring people back to the Abbey line.
Yeah, it's just the thinking is that the Abbey line, because of the nature of and the number of alternative ways of doing that journey, is particularly susceptible to relatively small things in both directions. So if it gets marginally worse, you lose a lot of passenger use. But conversely, if you can make it even marginally better, you will substantially increase the use.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Lovely. Any more questions to ask David? This is your final. Kevin, you want to go, do you?
Yeah, it's actually building on a couple of things you mentioned, David. Talking about the east-west route, the importance of that long forgotten dimension of travel needs that people have had, that everyone has to travel into London and out again. One of the things to add to your ideas is the fact that Hertfordshire have been looking very seriously at this. And I know Trevor Mason, I don't know if he's still with us, but he was joining us tonight from the County Council's rail unit, has been involved with the A414 study, which is about a rapid transit from Hemel Hempstead across to Hatfield, linking all the main lines, of which the Abbey line was seen as an important feeder. And it was linked in also with, from recollection, the idea of something very similar that you were suggesting there, which is of a park and ride facility somewhere along adjacent to the A414, which would enable people to get off whatever east-west movement they made, whether it was on the rapid transit or by car, park their car and get on the train, either to go into St Albans one direction or into Watford the other direction. Because, of course, as Dave Parry just mentioned, those routes, the road routes, are incredibly congested. I think they're one of the most congested in the whole of Hertfordshire. And certainly any problem on the A414, A40, whatever it is, into Watford, an accident or congestion just brings the whole area into gridlock. So there are ideas around. They're all, of course, very dependent on government money ultimately. And you've explained very well, I think, the dilemmas there and the difficulties, particularly in the current climate, that might have.
Perhaps I'll just very quickly come back. So, Trevor Mason, Hertfordshire County Council, just picking up the point, the A414 mass rapid transit scheme, there's work going on about that. So it's basically looking across the whole of Hertfordshire, and one of the key issues for me is about linking up all the radial routes. There'll be a lot of work beyond that. As you imagine, it's a huge scheme. There should be further public consultation information sometime later on this year. I suppose the other thing to mention is we have got we've got funding from the DFT's Restoring a Rail Fund, so that we're currently looking at to see whether we increase the frequency on the Abbey line. It has looked at all options, but the passing live is not obvious option. So that work is currently being undertaken and obviously supported directly by Department of Transport and Network Rails. So fingers crossed we might get some positive outcome of that, which would obviously increase the frequencies, as other people have said, that'll make a huge difference in terms of passengers on the line. So fingers crossed on that one.
It'd be good to, I think, look at the operational business case, because I seem to recall it's not always that difficult to get, as in money for actually building the passing loop, but I seem to recall it was always making the case for the extra train that used to kill off the business case. And that, I think, principally comes down to the cost of operating the railway, not really within anyone's control here. It's Network Rail, it's the train operators, and that's kind of why I alluded to the type of rolling stock, because a much lighter, cheaper train to build and operate could make the difference between having two trains versus the cost of operating one. I think that maybe needs a bit more focus, but that's where you got the trade-off between heavy duty rolling stock, through running, capable, and local service with possibly cheaper to operate rolling stock.
Yes, when we did the feasibility study, it was viable if you had two car trains. It worked out to be viable. If you went beyond that, it became challenging.
Yeah, I remember talking to you, Richard, about the Viva Rail trains at the time. Is that yes, we can do a two-car train. It would be a battery train, so you could charge it from the overhead lines at one end, but you wouldn't be using the wire for the rest of the journey, which is a bit ridiculous. So I don't think you'd do that. It's a shame we don't do an overhead version.
Can I just go back on the positive news? Is the Department of Transport, certainly for this Restoring a Railway project, are looking much wider case. So whereas before, it's quite hard-nosed economic case, in which case the Abbey line would struggle. They're very much saying it needs to look at the wider social and wider economy and other issues. So I think that that's a real positive step for the Abbey line. It's got much. It serves, as you said, David, the wider community rather than necessarily being a big money spinner. So across on that.
Do you know whether the way in which business cases are developed now, is there a formula for taking into account social impact in a way there perhaps wasn't in the past? I don't know whether they do that anymore.
I don't know the full detail of how it's all worked out. But it is. But say they'll very much look at some of the non-quantifiable issues as well, and look at it much more holistically than they have done in the past, which to me is a very positive step for a railway of this nature.
Yeah, that's good. There's a question here, Kevin, from John Cartle. I can't see the second half of the name. Anyway, it says, can you say anything about the original use of the Travis Perkins depot and why this secret installation was at Bricket Wood? Yes, the Travis Perkins depot is split in. Well, Travis Perkins owned two sites, one either side of the station. There's the original goods yard, which was the builders merchants, and then the other side of it is the secret nuclear bunker, which isn't actually secret at all, and it's not really nuclear bunker, but that was built in, I think, 1954 during the height of the Cold War, and it was to be the dispersed operations centre for controlling the railways. But there was only actually like 6 desks in there, so I don't know what they thought they were control with 6 people. But in the event of a direct hit on London, and therefore knocking out London Midland headquarters at Euston, the idea is that the little control bunker at Bricket Wood would carry on operating the railways for as long as possible. But it was never obviously used in anger. It was never furnished, but it's still there and it's listed now. So any developer's going to have to take that into consideration. It'd be quite nice if we took it on eventually as part of the Bricket Wood Station Trust, but we can't say that officially. Oops, I just did.
Okay, assuming there's nothing else now, and looking at the time, coming up to 9:30 now, I wonder if I can wrap it up with, again, thanking you very much. There's clearly a lot of effort, as well as a lot of your life really put into this line, but a lot of effort has been put into the presentation you've given us tonight, and it's clearly been very much appreciated, just looking at the comments coming through, and indeed the huge number of people who've come along to join us tonight. So thank you very much, Dave, for that, and thank you everyone else for joining us, and keep in touch with us, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Come and have a cup of tea at Bricket Wood when we're up and running. So, yeah, thanks everyone, very, very good.
Thank you
you all.